This program is powered by thevirtual.show, making your offline events virtual. Ladies and gentlemen, the host of WEBIT Virtual, Dr. Plamen Russev.
Dear wonderful WEBIT community, please accept the apologies for being late today. This has never happened for the past 3.5 months of history of WEBIT Virtual, and hopefully it will not happen before. Of course, there are many reasons, but the best ones are the trivial ones. I was left without any internet connection, so I couldn't connect to the virtual studio of WEBIT, so we start this. Apologies for all of you who waited until now, and I'm really so sorry for making you stay online. The same apologies I would like to extend to my very special guests, and this is an amazing opportunity for all of us to touch with truly forward thinkers in the area of mobility innovation and the future of mobility. And it will be a fantastic 60 minutes starting from now. Again, please accept my apologies for this delay. And let's move ahead with the big dreams and the big projects ahead of us. Today I have two very special guests. You already know who they are, and I would like to introduce the first one right now.
Dr. Sandra Bour-Schaeffer is the head of Airbus Group Demonstrators and the CEO of Airbus Up Next. In these roles, Sandra helps shape the future of airspace by using flying demonstrators to evaluate, mature and validate new technological breakthroughs in space, aviation, helicopters and urban air mobility. She is highly focused on Airbus's efforts to both reinvent and accelerate airspace research and prototype development, and boldly experiment to build the future of flight.
Sandra, thank you for joining. Such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Plamen, for the warm welcome, and good afternoon, WEBIT community. It's a great pleasure to be here today on this virtual table to speak to all of you. You told me 153 countries are connected.
153 countries, Sandra. That's how interesting is the topic we are going to be discussing today with you and with Scott, who I will introduce a little bit later. And we are having also a special guest with us, who has been with us yesterday, Jill, who will be representing the audience, our beautiful community from all around the world, and we'll be asking you the tough questions. So I will go for the easy ones now. And the first one is, wow, what a career you have. A great example of female leadership and in one of the industries that's like many others. We don't see a lot of females there. So can you tell us a little bit of about you? I mean, beyond the
we have more and more females actually interested.
Yeah, please go ahead. Sorry.
Well, yes, I've been working in the aerospace industry for more than 20 years now, and we have lots of very talented women, but also more generally a great amount of diversity in Airbus. And I really do believe this is a great asset of the company. And I think diversity goes much beyond just the gender diversity. I think this very mixture of different horizons, different cultures, different point of views is really what creates this pioneering spirit. And in the videos you have showed, you can see me as a test crew member. Since then, I've moved on in Airbus, and I'm now the CEO of Airbus Up Next, which is part of our Airbus innovation ecosystem.
So yeah, please tell us more about this. Actually, this is very interesting. What is Airbus Up Next about?
So it's really, I think it links to your mission at WEBIT. Our purpose is to shape the future of aerospace. And what we want to do is fly future technologies today. We work to accelerate the technologies that are mission critical in this age, those that will be foundational to our future products and services, really. So to help Airbus remain a leader in innovation, we at UpNext, we have departed from what we could call the traditional development approach in aviation. You know, we used to do, and we still do, and it is important, but there's another building block to it. And what we try to do is we go away from the plan, discuss, negotiate, draft, revise, then begin the building way of approach. And what we want to do is have a straight hands-on demonstrator approach. So if you think flying prototypes, this is really what enables our organization to rapidly test ideas, to advance the new technologies, and resolve really a variety of risks associated with this cutting-edge pursuits. So we learn by flying, by trying, by testing, and by doing all of this much more quickly, whilst retaining, obviously, our vital safety standards. And also, we want to attract and inspire the talent that thinks inventively about those technologies, that do not shy away from bold experimentation, and really seek to change the role aviation holds in the world for the better.
I would be happy to have our audience involved in our discussion now, not only ask you questions, but I have a question for you. I'm requesting now the studio to publish it if they haven't done it yet. And the question today is, would you give your life in the hands, or basically, would you fly autonomous flying car where you just sit and that's it? The show starts from there. I know that Sandra can speak about this a lot later on, but please answer that question. All of you, all around the world, how many of you would you do this? Thumbs up? Yes. Thumbs down? No way. So let's see how this is going to shape from our audience point of view. And Sandra, back to you. Tell us more about the demonstrators that you're working on. Where is it heading? What is it about?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned autonomy. I actually do believe it is a very important asset in aviation. And very recently, we have celebrated our very world's first fully autonomous, vision-based taxi takeoff and landing. And that not on an eVTOL, but on a huge aircraft, on our A350. So we took one of our A350 development aircraft, and our so-called ATOL demonstrator, which stands for Autonomous Taxi Takeoff and Landing, has demonstrated that we actually can safely, thanks to vision-based cameras we have put all around the cockpits, intelligence and software, we can actually taxi the aircraft on the taxiway up to the threshold of the runway, taking off safely, doing a pattern and coming back to landing. All of that based on vision. And this is a great achievement. And really, to me, autonomy is very important because even on those big airplanes, it actually helps pilots focus on the essential strategic decision-making, and it relieves the routine workload, if you wish. So I actually do believe that autonomy, well used, serves the purpose of safety.
No, we all know that autonomy with the airspace industry has been in place for like past 20 years. So it's not going to be such a big deal. And from your shoes, being in your own shoes, I'm sure you take it like something absolutely normal. But at the same time, I would be really very interested to see how our community will react to that. And that's the beauty of WEBIT. We speak about things that people perceive as a long time future with people who actually do it now. So I will leave more about these questions for a later stage when we shall get very much into details. But I would like to go back now to the biggest challenges. And we talk a lot about zero emissions. We had the CEO and chief pilot, the founder and chief pilot of Solar Impulse here with us. And we were discussing that COVID actually, by pushing down the prices of all these fossil fuels, is actually bringing up even newer opportunities, because everything becomes cheaper on the way. So you can produce more solar panels, etc., etc. So, but also we hear France and Germany talking about hydrogen. So, what is the energy of the future for the aerospace industry from your point of view?
Well, I think there are different answers to it depending on what platform you're talking about. We as Airbus, our mission is really to pioneer sustainable aerospace for a safe and united world. And if you look to an eVTOL, which could be fully autonomous flying on battery, this very same technology does not apply on a long-haul aircraft like an A350. So it's really our mission to investigate several avenues. And as you probably know, the latest aircrafts are much more fuel efficient than the previous generation. And if I say much more, it's something of the order of magnitude of 25% in average. Then what you could do very short term on that is have sustainable aviation fuel, which also will allow to reduce with today's engine very significantly the emissions of today's airplanes. There are other avenues, and you might have heard of our fellow fly demonstrators, which is actually a way to look into air traffic management. What we were basically inspired by biomimicry and looking at how birds are migrating. You know, they fly in V shape. And actually, why do they do that? Because the bird behind takes benefit of the energy that is in the wake from the previous bird. And this very same logic applies to airplanes as well. And we've actually demonstrated that if you position the airplanes safely, and safely, they are more than 1.5 nautical miles away one from each other, so we are not at all talking about close formation, you still do benefit from the energy of the wake of the aircraft in front of you. And you can gain something between 5 to 10% of fuel trip and fuel consumption on a flight from Europe to the US, for example. So this is something we could also implement. It's a different way of looking at airplane operation and the way you actually do those long haul flights, which can be applicable to today's fleet. Then, of course, we're also looking into the future. And there we believe in hybrid electrification. I like the sculptor Izami Noguchi. He once powerfully said, to be hybrid, anticipate the future. And I actually believe this to be the case. So more hybrid electrical propulsion is definitely something we will be introducing on the fleets to come. And yes, we're also looking at much further advanced technologies like hydrogen, which we believe it's a real interesting potential source of energy for the bigger, or let's say airplanes in the like regional airplane flying within the US or flying within Europe or within Australia or Asia, for example. And we're even going further, looking at potential of cryogenic and superconductive propulsion train. So really, I think what you have to keep in mind is decarbonization will have different answers depending on what vehicle you're talking about. Is it an eVTOL? Is it a helicopter? Is it a long-haul airplane? And there are several steps to decarbonization. Some of them you can apply right now, and others which will come rather in the middle of the next decade.
You have asked me how was the episode on mobility with your colleague Christian, and this was the demo day. We call it Demo Founders and Investors Day, where we had investors from the Volvo Technology Fund, from the managing director of Toyota AI Fund, from Oliver Wyman, the leader of mobility, and some other investors that are representing the big pockets of the industry. I would love you to see some of the, we had airspace solutions, we had Hyperloop, turning the railways into a Hyperloop solution, and we had the most efficient car in the world with 98% efficiency driven by solar energy. It was very interesting, and Most of the people's take on hydrogen was like, yeah, it's a great technology, it's a great opportunity, but still electricity will be the kink in the next few years, based on the fact that all industry players are now turning their face, especially in the automotive industry, turning their faces towards and already built such a big production facilities. And having in mind that Tesla is currently the most valuable company in the automotive industry, it's very interesting. We are going to be hosting I think in a 2 weeks time, a special week on corporate responsibility, and we have and we will talk about the climate change, and obviously that's the logical continuation of my previous question to you. So in regards of that major issue, before COVID, we were all very much concerned about our footprint of the nature, and that's why I believe the new normal must be finally the normal, and we are going not to be polluting our home, but living in synergy with it. So what is the Airbus take on that? And I'm sure you see the upcoming innovation first, so you know best.
Well, clearly, I mean, it's a fair question in today's COVID context. A few weeks ago, I would have told you that air traffic is doubling every 15 years from now. We look at a huge increase of the market. We have facing a shortage of pilots. All of that has been put almost to a stop, really, with the COVID crisis, where traffic is down some 80% compared to last year. Yeah. I still do believe that aviation has a very important role to play. Aviation is really connecting the world faster and further than any other means of transport. But there is no other technology that could replace aircraft anytime soon. Also, I would personally love to use teletransportation, but we are just not there at all. So yes, I do believe aerospace has a role to play. We have seen it even in this very crisis with transporting goods, masks from the different regions of the world, providing everyday goods, and also connecting people and cultures. And I think I'm a very good example of that. My mother's German, my father's French, my cousin's Spanish, my uncle English. My kids have friends all over the world, and really, aviation is a strong contributor to that, helping this diversity to be created and linking people and different cultures and building great things together. So yes, I do believe aviation has a role to play, and I do believe that aviation needs to decarbonize, and this is really what we are committed to at Airbus. So we will continue our road on investigating, as I said, many different technologies, because if you look at the vast variety of our products, there's no one single answer. Electrification is very good for eVTOL, as we said. It's definitely as a single solution not applicable to long-haul flights. So we need to look at the variety of solutions, but we are more than ever, or as ever, committed to really go with our final customers down this journey of decarbonization of the aviation industry.
Sandra, thank you so much. Please stay with us. I would like to invite our second guest now to the studio, and we're going to be having equally amazing, exciting talk with him. And then we shall be having a discussion panel, all of us, and hopefully representing also all the questions from the audience. With your permission, I would like to introduce my second guest today.
Scott Corwin is a managing director with Deloitte Consulting and leads Deloitte's global Future of Mobility practice. He and his Future of Mobility team are working closely with corporations, governments, academia, communities, and NGOs to actively shape the emergence of the mobility ecosystem.
Scott, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Plamen, thank you very much. I'm delighted to join you and the WEBIT community across all these different countries. And I think we're probably working the clock from morning to afternoon to evening, and delighted and really looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. It's like 8 a.m., a little bit at 8:30 in San Francisco, and it's 8:30 in 9 now in India PM, and China 11 and Europe. So we're since we became virtual, we became even more global than we were. And I'm so grateful to all of them that you kindly mentioned. Now we are already 9,000 on that channel together, and they stick with us. So they still appreciate and can forgive these technical challenges, even though I find it unforgivable. But thank you so much for being with us, and apologies for keeping you 10 minutes more. I know how busy you are at Deloitte Future Mobility Practice. And actually, I would like to ask you first to elaborate on your vision on the future of mobility.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed listening to Sandra and the description that she had of the journey that Airbus has been on and what her team has been doing, because in many ways, our journey has paralleled that. We started the Future Mobility Practice 5+ years ago. It came about really from a bunch of clients saying the world is changing. We were seeing systems type changes very similar to the things that Sandra described in aerospace in terms of shifts in energy sources, new materials, intelligent materials, lightweight materials, massive connectivity and digitization, and on the ground, the adoption of shared models, and then autonomy. And it's the convergence of those things, not any one of them per se, that has really disrupted and created this transformation in mobility in terms of particularly surface, but you're also seeing it in unmanned aerial space, you're seeing it in Hyperloop, you're seeing it in lots of different places. And what that's done from our perspective is that traditional industries and players, automotive, the mass transit agencies, the manufacturers of these things, are now confronted with how do we build more integrated approaches to deliver mobility, both for the movement of people and movement of goods that's faster, that's safer, that's cleaner, that's cheaper, that's more inclusive and accessible. And the latter is actually more important than ever. And so it's confronting legacy players with how do they transform their business model and how do they succeed in this new ecosystem. And our view is that new ecosystems of players are coming together. And then you have these innovators and disruptors that have basically looked at the mobility system, regardless of whether it's cars or delivery of goods, and said, you know, the old paradigms, we're not wedded to them. There's actually whole new ways of thinking about how we can move. And the disruptors really aren't playing defense. They have the ability to kind of look at it with a clean sheet and not have to, and essentially really try to deal with the negative externalities of a 100-year-old automotive industry, a 100-year-old transit system, a half a century-old aerospace system. These are really going through incredible changes.
You have been advancing with Deloitte the seamless multimodal mobility systems, and I have asked my team to prepare your Ben's video of how Ben is doing his commute in the cities. While the video is on, I would like to have your point of view of what are the biggest challenges that cities will have and have to adapt. Obviously, COVID has been accelerating some of these, and we had a lot of discussions around how the whole mobility paradigm is changing, and basically the transportation system is the blood vessel system of every city. So what will be your take on that?
Yeah, so what we've begun to see is this incredible movement towards seamless integrated mobility, where you can go from point A to point B using different modes. And in the not too distant future, there are already digital technologies that allow you to plan, book, pay for those different forms. And what's important about that and why that's so critical up to sort of COVID is that we were dealing with rapid rise in population in urban centers. Today, half the people on the planet live in cities. By 2050, it had been anticipated that 2/3, so we were going to go from 3 billion to 6 billion people living in cities. Most cities are geographically constrained. They don't have the built environment to keep adding more roads. So the question is, how do you move more people and goods in a sort of fixed, constrained environment? And the other sort of interesting thing is that we've seen this incredible supply side innovation that's taken place from originally on-demand shuttle buses and car sharing and ride hailing and scooters now that you can get and all sorts of different forms. But to a great extent, let's not kid ourselves, they've actually added to the congestion problem. They've been done to cities, not necessarily with cities. And cities have begun to think about how to regulate and build a vision of what their cities want to be. And ultimately, what will need to happen is a equilibrium across these different modes where essentially we can get people and try to induce them and convince them to take cleaner forms of mobility. And one of the things about COVID that we've paid a really expensive price for it, but we've actually seen what clean air is like in cities that haven't had it for a long time. We've seen what it's like not to have massive traffic jams. And one of the byproducts, though, is that because of this hidden threat, I mean, in the old days, think about it. You used to be afraid potentially that you might get into an accident in a car. You might be late at night on a railroad platform and it might not be super safe, or you might be at a lonely bus stop. Those are sort of physical threats that you could anticipate and sense, but this is an invisible threat. And the simple reality is if we're going to get our economies going again, is we need cities to figure out how to in fact make transit safe. And what we'll have in the near term, and we're already seeing it in cities, is a flight back to single occupant vehicles as the primary modes for people to transport. We're also seeing active mobility with bicycling and walking and other forms, but people legitimately are very concerned about the sanitization of the modes of how they're traveling. And the minute you have density, that problem occurs in spades. I think there will be solutions. I think that we're going to find workarounds to this, but it's going to take a while. And obviously, once we get to the point where we have really advanced tracing of the disease and ultimately a vaccine, then people will feel a lot more confident about sort of returning to some version of what life used to be like. You used the word new normal. I don't really like that expression. There will be some normal or something new that is coming.
No, me neither. I don't like the new normal. I just hope it will be finally normal. That we shall really behave more responsibly to each other, to ourselves, to the future of our own children and the humankind. Because obviously the planet Earth can recover quite quickly, as you rightfully mentioned, not only the air in London, but the canals in Venice and you name it, right? We see only 3 months, and after 3 months, everything goes back to normal for the planet Earth, but not for us. We see big changes in the behavior models of the passengers. So we already started discussions. COVID has imposed really major challenges and changes. So first, my question would be, what would be the implication for the players on the market? And second, what do you expect would be the new paradigms and the new models, the new behavioral models of the passengers coming back to their, maybe are they going to come back to their usual commute, especially having in mind that the new concepts of work from home became more and more widely spread, like Twitter, Shopify, they announced welcome from home concept, regardless of COVID. They say you can do it until the end. So what would be your expectation?
So we just released a few weeks ago, like every consulting firm, our take on COVID across lots of different sectors. And my team came out with a piece on the futures of mobility after COVID. And we decided to sort of look out 3+ years, and we built on a set of scenarios that some of the leading strategic scenario planners put together that are part of our firm and part of other, that they built really the whole dynamic of that kind of thinking. And to be really honest, it's too early to know the answer to the question you're asking. If we're really truthful, we don't know the answer. It's predicated on two fundamental things. One is how long and how severe and how deep is this pandemic, right? We still don't really know the answer to that. We don't know.
Absolutely, uncertainty is for everywhere, yeah.
We don't know whether we'll have second waves. The second piece is, what is the relationship and cooperation among governments? We are talking about a global pandemic, and the question is, in different countries at the city level, at the state or regional or provincial level, in the federal government, and then across countries, what is the government response? And we're seeing very different responses. And so we came up with 4 different scenarios. The one that we all hope for is that this is a V recovery, that we get our arms around this pretty quickly, that the economies start to come back. But it's been pretty severe. And even there, what you're seeing in different countries is massive government aid to an automotive industry, aid to the airline industry, aid to mass transit systems where their utilization rates have dropped to 50 or 80% of what they were pre-COVID. I was on with on a Zoom call the other day with a very good friend of mine who leads mobility for the city of Lisbon. And he said they're down 60, 70% because people don't yet have confidence about coming back. And if you talk to the folks in LA or you talk to the people in Singapore, you'll hear very similar stories around this. So there's been federal, relief given to these. And then the private sector, where you look at sort of private funding and all that venture capital, what we're seeing is a beginning of that to slow down. Because like in the automotive industry, they're starting to pull back on these mobility investments. They're still focused on EVs because they have carbon emission requirements in a lot of countries that they have to meet, and it's part of the way that they create a balanced portfolio. However, some of the real innovation that's taking them outside of their traditional business models, for the near term, they're pulling back to the core. Yet we're at a moment, and I lived through 2009, I helped one of the global OEMs put their viability plan together that got them federal funding. It's different this time. And what's different this time is it's not just an economic cyclical shift. This is a massive sectoral and structural shift. And so on the other side of this, what the future looks like is going to be very different. So we're at a really interesting moment in the sense of all of this innovation that has offered this enormous promise. Will it slow down? Will its adoption rate take different forms? How will these different players come together? And this coming together piece is really the key. The core of what our work has been at the center of shaping this ecosystem with all of these different players across all these different industries to choreograph how this comes together. And that is a really difficult and challenging thing to do. And I'm not saying that we're alone in that. Organizations such as yours, such as the World Economic Forum, all sorts of universities that are on the cutting edge of R&D, industry players, even the Pope is actually engaged in this dialogue, thinking about global warming and his encyclical on Laudato Si and what it means in terms of the future of work and jobs and future income and the transition, right? And what it means for equity and equality and diversity and creating better communities. Your point earlier is spot on, that mobility is the lifeblood of actually economic growth and progress in our cities. And so it is a moral imperative that we collectively figure out how to build the most sustainable and most equitable mobility system in our cities, and actually more broadly than that.
I like the word collaborative. I like the way togetherness. That's why we have accepted the invitation by World Economic Forum to become their strategic partners in supporting their mission, currently building a new platform to support the recovery and the post-COVID world by providing access to all our ecosystem of innovators around the world, hosting the world's biggest startup challenge, and bringing more and more ourselves having the COVID-19 health security challenge with over 350 companies applying. So I believe in this collaborative approach, and I'm so grateful. And we collaboratively now with you, thanks to your time and commitment to the WEBIT community now, we build that notion and knowledge. And without further ado, I would like to invite you all to the studio, including our special guest and someone who is going to help me with the last part of this event. I'm more than happy to welcome with us Jim Motavalli, but let me first play his video card for you.
Jim Motavalli is an auto columnist at Barron's. He also writes for the New York Times, Media Village, Sierra, Autoblog.com, National Public Radio's Car Talk, and others. Jim has written for many other editions as well, and he is also a contributor to the Environmental Defense Fund publications.
Jim, thank you for joining us again today, and absolutely honored to have you with us with so many years being the columnist writing Wills, like 25 years, and writing for Barron's, also for New York Times, Media Village, Sierra, Autoblog, etc. There could be nobody better than you joining this discussion. So I would like to have now all of us in the studio, but I'm giving you the lead and ask your questions and representing our audience online.
Yes, well, we're at a very interesting period. As you mentioned, I've been covering the space for 25 years, and we had pretty much a steady evolution in vehicle technology. And I think we've known about the idea of electric cars and autonomous cars for the last 10 years. We've been making progress on that. I think we've reached, maybe you could say, a plateau even before COVID on autonomous vehicle development. Getting to the last stage, which is called level 5 of full autonomy, is a pretty difficult hurdle. Now it is, but COVID throws a wrench into everything. You know, the auto industry has been massively affected by COVID too, but it's actually sees sort of a lifeline in the fact that people want to be in cars. There's some pent up demand for cars that hasn't been satisfied. So that's kind of where we're at. And since we don't have a real timeline to the end of COVID, there's a lot of uncertainty that's at play here. So I'm going to bring in some of the questions that people have asked and directing them towards you. And we had a viewer in the UK asking, when are we going to see flying cars? Now that question, I mean, the way that question is phrased shows the public imagination. People love the idea of flying cars, and one of my books has a long section on the history of that, which goes back into the 50s. There were numerous flying car prototypes, but the vertical takeoff and landing aircraft is probably the flying car of the future. So, Sandra, how has this been affected, VTOL, been affected, the prognosis for that? Because you'd have to say that the air taxi is faced with some of the same challenges that are affecting Lyft and Uber right now, that it's going to be a device that many people are going to sit in. So how do you see it affecting the timetable? I think VTOL is inevitable, but the timetable may be delayed.
Well, there are lots of players, as you know, around the world working on eVTOL, so electric vertical taxi takeoff and landing vehicles. Ourselves at Airbus, we have built 2 demonstrators around it. One is the HANA. It's actually a single seater. So this is already part of the answer you are looking for in terms of are there several people around in this very same car or flying Beetle. We have also built a demonstrator which is called City Airbus, which is a four-seater actually. So today, what I do believe is, as Scott rightly mentioned, we don't know exactly how the future post-COVID will look like, or are we gonna focus rather on single-seater vehicles or continue with some larger vehicles? We don't know, but I believe what is essential in urban air mobility today is its potential, because it is fully zero emission. It has the potential to link people to cities and the regions and build really a new landscape around these mega cities, as you mentioned. And I think today, one of the very, very important things, the most important thing in my view to make urban air mobility a reality is safety. Scott mentioned it. It is very important for people to feel safe in their transport, whatever transport vehicle they are choosing. And aviation industry has a track record in safety. It is the safest transport vehicle existing today. And urban air mobility will have to come into the market at exactly this same level of safety as the bigger airlines have today. So this, to me, is the biggest challenge really around urban air mobility.
I'm fascinated by some of the technology you talk about in aerospace. Actually has parallels on the road, and the wake, capturing the wake of the plane is very similar to platooning in the trucking industry. Mm-hmm. And we may actually see autonomous trucks before we see autonomous cars, but the same basic principle, right? Just on the ground. Scott, let me pivot to you and ask you, I was looking at your 4 scenarios of a post-COVID mobility future, and they range from like a mild hiccup to something out of Mad Max on the extreme. And I don't know. Actually, Americans love post-apocalyptic films, but did you weight any of these scenarios? Like, which is the more likely?
We did not weight them. And by the way, our team didn't come up with the scenarios. Our scenario planners did it more broadly. And then what we did is we said, that's a really interesting frame. Let's think about what the implications are for mobility. So there are 4 scenarios. The first is, we get through this relatively quickly. We call it a passing storm. The second one is that the severity is actually longer than we imagined. And what happens is that all that federal aid gets really depleted, and therefore the private sector, and particularly tech players, step up, and we call that good company. And sort of more propensity for us to be open to the idea of sharing data and information. The third is that countries in the East get their arms around this a lot faster, and because of their government systems and whatnot, and that this shift we've seen in globalization, that we call it the rise in the East, and that it enables them effectively to take a really big lead in a number of industries. And then the last one is a little bit the Mad Max scenario, if you will. It's really severe, the recovery, there isn't a lot of government cooperation, and therefore we get very insular and sort of a extreme form of nationalism, and we very much try to use all our own resources. That would be a very difficult and long period, and certainly will heavily impact mobility innovation. The point of these scenarios, I think this is also really key, is not that we're saying that any one of them actually is the answer of what the future is. We did it because we wanted to create mental mind maps for leaders across different sectors to think about the possibility of what those 4 things are and what it might mean for the way that they approach this. My own view, unsubstantiated, this is pure opinion, is that we will probably, I pray for the first one. I'm not sure that will happen. I do think we will see a bit of the second one with good company, and I do think we will continue to see the rise in these. So we may end up with sort of a hybrid form of these scenarios in the future. And our intent is that in sort of 3 or 4 or 5 months from now, when there's greater clarity, we will go a lot deeper. We just wanted to avoid coming out with single point data forecasts of what car sales are going to be, what miles traveled will be, what gross, sort of revenue impacts by sector. We just felt that there are too many variables there, and you could create a whole range of things. And in the end, you'd look back and say they're all wrong. And so we tried to sort of create a way to frame this dialogue.
I think that's probably the wisest approach at the moment, admitting that there's uncertainty there. And of course, if a vaccine does arrive, that is definitely the game changer that could actually make this your first scenario, the sort of hiccup scenario, be the one that actually obtains. I wanted to look at some of the questions that people are asking. They want to know about the general trends. This is a viewer from Belgium. Most notable trends in green transportation. And I think we've talked about them a little bit. They are electric cars and VTOL aircraft and autonomy on the road, which everybody is aiming for. And I understand there's something like 250 players in the whole VTOL space, which is an incredible consensus that this is a technology that people of the future will embrace. And I know, Sandra, that your division of Airbus gets into things other than just VTOL. And you had mentioned the idea of the VTOLs, the short range VTOLs are electric as well as autonomous. Do you really think that, say, and we've had solar planes that have flown around the country, and I think that was a feature right here on WEBIT a couple of days ago, Virgin's plane. Will we see hydrogen fueling planes? Will we make radical changes in aircraft fueling?
It's definitely a route we are investigating as well. So hydrogen propulsion could be an option for regional aircraft. So traveling, as I said, across the US or across Europe or across Asia. So it is one part of the equation, and definitely one source of fuel we are also investigating.
And that, again, that same basic fuel idea, hydrogen, sort of a hybrid hydrogen system, is talking about for trucking, for long haul trucking, to replace diesel fuel, which everyone wants to get rid of.
Exactly. You could use it either in a hybrid solution, or you could have a full hydrogen plane. So again, it depends what is the range you are considering, what is the number of passengers on board you would like to have, what is actually the mission of this airplane. And there's a whole ecosystem to build around that. And that's why we very quickly joined the Hydrogen Council as an aircraft manufacturer, because we believe it is not a solution we can implement on our own. It was mentioned earlier already in the talk. This new generation, this next steps toward decarbonization need really collaboration, wide collaboration across the industry. And this is also something which is needed on the hydrogen part. So it's about, yes, having clean hydrogen first available. It's about distributing it. It's about certifying airplanes that would have hydrogen aboard. So it's really a whole ecosystem that needs to work together to make that a reality.
Scott, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned earlier the importance of intermodality, which has long been a principle in sustainable transportation. The idea you could take a train and have it connect to a bus or to a light rail system. And I think there's certain cities, say in the US, it's widespread in Europe. I mean, it's everywhere in Europe, but in the US, there's certain cities like Portland, Oregon, that have done the best job of this. And New York City is the least car-dependent city in America, and people are very intermodal there. but isn't intermodality somewhat dependent on density, which is kind of threatened right now? But again, it's all very speculative given the state of reality right now.
Well, it is, except that inside all those cities, you still have massive congestion. You still have, we average 1.1 people per car, and with population growth and essentially roads not expanding, we can't pave everywhere. So the challenge is actually getting people to make modal shifts. And that's where all this innovation is really interesting. And we're talking about the movement of people in these sort of tight environments. And today, there is, to some extent, the calculus that we all make as individuals about the way we travel. Most people who commute on a daily basis, they're creatures of habit. They have their sort of set patterns. You take the car to the train station if you live in suburbia, you take the train into the city, you then take a subway or light rail. That's what Ben's journey was about. It was trying to show that there were different modes that could come together in different ways. And the interesting thing about AVs, and particularly in urban environments and some of these sort of smaller things, is that if in fact we get that technology right, and we're really close actually to it being there, it may not work in Manhattan for the time being, but in sort of less dense places, you can, take some of the spatial distance out between cars because they'll nearly never crash, so that helps on the throughput. We could end up with single or double sort of seated vehicles. They could be a lot more lightweight. Almost for sure they're going to be electric, because we've learned that the AV technology in terms of latency of drive-by-wire and all the connective systems works a heck of a lot better if it's an EV. If more than likely the adoption of these things in cities will be through fleets, not as individual car ownership to begin with, which then takes away range anxiety and helps in terms of the recharging and the entire sort of ecosystem. But I actually think that where the big, one of the things that comes out of COVID, and we didn't really talk about it, and you could tie it back to all the stuff going on in the air as well, is the movement of goods. We're going to see probably the adoption of a lot of these things in a B2B context that are far less sort of emotional, that require sort of each of us as individuals making choices. As you know, we have a massive shortfall of licensed commercial truck drivers in the United States. We've seen this incredible rise of e-commerce. We need to figure out how to move more goods more cleanly. And with the Peloton technologies you've talked about, with last mile delivery, which will be electric, either carts or vans, all this stuff is starting to happen. And I quite agree with your comment earlier that we're likely to see long-haul AV trucking on highways relatively soon, sort of repurposing HOV lanes, even if it isn't full level 5, but adaptive to support truck drivers so they could actually drive longer and not have all these mandated rules that limit the amount of time that they could be on the road.
The companies are talking about 2025 for the first commercial self-driving trucks and the technology, which maybe end up leased to trucking companies rather than their own buying. They may end up buying trucks or that nature. Here's a question that you can give very quick answers to this, and we got into it a little bit in our WEBIT talk yesterday. Do you think the future of mobility is owned, or people will own their vehicles, or shared? Sandra, obviously something like your Airbus air taxis are shared transportation, and aircraft is also. Do you think we're
Thank you for connecting that dialogue, Jim. Thank you so much for that question. I think it's very important. In the meantime, I just want to remind that there are a few more minutes left for everyone watching all different platforms around the world. In order to answer the question, will you trust your live commute in autonomous flying cars? Go to virtual.webit.org and cast your vote. Quite interesting results. I will let you know in a sec. Sandra, back to you.
You could just say shared or privately owned.
Both, but mostly shared, I would say.
Scott, what do you think?
Growth is going to be shared, and we will figure out how to solve the fears of sanitization with smart materials that can be self-cleaning and all the rest. It's coming. It's coming relatively quickly.
Okay, here's a question I definitely don't know the answer to because I don't know what this is, but this is a viewer from Spain. What do you think of quantum generators?
Well, it's not something
you have
we
like
are
30
looking
seconds to
into.
answer that question. It's a simple one.
I think we
Maybe
need a
none of
new
us have
WEBIT on
anything
this
against
one.
quantum generators because we don't know what they are, but
I was
I like
hoping
the
that
sound of it.
Sandra, as the engineer, can answer that.
That's,
well, I think we're probably agreed that we're facing a lot of uncertainty moving forward. I would say that the trends that we're talking about, which include electrification and automation, are pretty firmly established, and they're governed to a certain extent by regulation, both in the United States, well, to a lesser extent in the US right now, but in Europe, definitely. And I don't think those trends are going to disappear. I think the auto industry is moving towards full electrification. Companies like Volvo have already said their entire car line will be electrified. And that's an unstoppable trend, I think, as well as autonomy is. Whether people are quite ready for it right now, and there's been some retreat from the public on because of COVID on autonomous technology, but I think both those trends are very much with us and will stay with us. And they come together on your VTOL aircraft, and I'm sure, Scott, you see that as the future also.
Yeah, so I think the thing, though, about autonomy, it's sort of like the shared and personal question. We believe that actually we're going to see all four sort of segments exist, where there will, at least in the United States, for a long time, there will be personally owned driver-driven vehicles. There will be shared vehicles that are driver-driven. Autonomy will come, but we believe that it'll be in a shared model to begin with and then find its way into sort of the personal fleets. So it's really, and what that does is it creates massive complexity to the business models of all the players because they're not.
It's also, though, Scott, it's also the green model. I mean, because it greatly reduces the need for vehicles on the road. Right now, our cars sit 95% of the time, and we could massively reduce the car park with shared cars.
But I think the interesting thing that COVID has tested for us, this work from home, and is that an enduring trend where we work remotely and we don't actually commute the way we used to? What you're seeing with telemedicine, the future of health has been talking about this construct for 20 years. And all of a sudden now it is massively and widely adopted really fast. And if you talk to the healthcare leaders in major institutions, they don't think we're going back. Distance learning, we've talked about that too, but we've been forced to have our children, whether they're at university or elementary school. So the question is, how enduring are those trends and what does that do to the miles traveled? That's the part of the uncertainty that we don't know. There's definitely a flight to safety. There's a reliance on e-commerce. And then you have the innovation's not going to stop, but we hope it doesn't stop. The question is, how do we, in this sort of orchestration, bring these innovations in to be able to adopt them in ways that make sense?
Sandra, my brother-in-law actually owns a helicopter and uses it daily. And I remember Sikorsky Aircraft, which is headquartered near me, in the 40s, posited the idea of personal helicopter ownership. They thought this was the future of commuting in helicopters. But I think you're much more on a shared model here with our use of personal aircraft.
We have a few private customers, but you're right. Most of our customers are airlines or shared owners. But I actually do believe, as you said before, that the trend to decarbonization is not going to stop, and the trend to autonomy is not going to stop either. And we'll see that progressively. eVTOL is a good starting point, but I also think that we will see first autonomous airplanes flying for the transportation of cargo, for example, and then it will go up and further to relieve the workload of the pilots, and then progressively go into the world of passenger transportation at large.
Would you say that the public embrace of the drone is probably a sign that people like? I mean, is it fair to say that a VTOL is a big drone?
Well, it's a very, very complex drone, but there are also a very complex drone in the military field, for example. But it's definitely, I think eVTOL is a fabulous playground for autonomy. So will it start immediately with passenger transport being fully autonomous? I don't know. It will depend also on how much the society is ready for that, really, and how much we can prove the safety. As I mentioned, to me, the introduction of eVTOL is really linked to the fact that we have the same level of safety as the larger aviation has today.
Let me tell you, I'm hopeful that you're interested in the results of the votes today. It's a very interesting result. It was actually even more interesting when I said it's very interesting. Now there is, it was complete parity. Now we have a little bit of more votes for yes, I would trust my life. 2,063 votes of yes, I will trust my life to autonomous flying car. And we have 1,986 no, I won't. So it's like, and this is the WEBIT community. These are all global digerati from all around the world. You see how much the whole community is split almost in two equal parts. I hate to say what I'm going to say, but that's the end of this event. And I know how busy all of you are. The same to the WEBIT community. I have no right to take more of your time. And I'm so grateful to the three of you for being with us today. What an amazing mobility week it was. So we have the full week already in a wrap, and you will see the wrap of the video of all participants we were hosting for the mobility week. Next week we have digital entertainment and media. Start with the CEO of Forbes. We have some great participants from media like CNN, CNBC, and we'll be having a lot of analysis how the content has been driven and how home TV, on demand, etc. has been changed. We will see the future of sports. We will see the future of esports, and we'll be talking a lot on the new means of content creation. Saying all this, I am grateful to all of you being with us. Stay tuned. It will be again 4 events next week on digital entertainment and media. Stay with us. And I'll see you on Monday with the first one, with a special edition. Thank you again, Sandra, Scott, Jim. Thank you all. And thanks to the wonderful WEBIT community who's been again with us. See you on Monday. Have a nice weekend.
This program is powered by the Virtual.show, making your offline events virtual.